Hello and welcome to this continuation of the projectile weapons tutorial. So at this point we have a rocket launcher, and when you fire the rocket launcher it hits the game world and it can cause damage and it creates sounds and explosions and stuff like that. Now one thing you might have noticed in that example just there is that actually there were multiple effects, multiple sounds, and it actually called that apply radial damage multiple times. Now, the reason for that is there's a key part of this projectile script that we need to add. And that is a flag which says whether this has been exploded or not. So at the moment, what's happening is the rocket is being fired at the terrain and it hits the terrain, and then it runs this check trigger function, because if you remember the rocket has a trigger that calls the check trigger function. So when it hits something, it calls the check trigger. That then says, is it the player or is it the RPG that the player's holding? If it's not, then explode the rocket. Now what can happen is when you use a trigger, it can check, it can actually be entered several times by different things. So for example, if I go into my game world and if I shoot my rocket here, there's lots, there's this mesh, there's also the terrain. So that's two things that have entered the trigger. Not to mention that the next frame, it might check that it's entered the trigger and run that enter trigger function again. So we need to stop that happening. We only want to explode a rocket once, because an exploded rocket can't explode again. So let's write the logic for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a flag, which is a really useful technique, and it basically gives us the opportunity to say, has this thing exploded? If it hasn't exploded, then explode it. If it has exploded, don't explode it again. So, so the way we do that is we create a flag or a Boolean variable attached to the class called exploded, and that's going to start as false, because at the beginning our rocket has not exploded. Then when it explodes, that's when we need to set this exploded variable to true. Now, in order to get to explode, it runs this check trigger function, and at the moment it's saying, it's checking these values before it explodes. But first, let's check whether we've exploded or not. So if we haven't exploded, if not self.exploded, and the reason we put this at the start is that if it's exploded, it doesn't matter whether what we've hit. We just need to exit then. We need to not. This is false. So what's really good about these conditional functions is that it checks that, and then if that's false, it just stops. Then it checks that, and if that's false, then it stops, and it checks that, and if that's false, then it stops. So it won't check the other things. It's done in order. It will check them one by one. It will say, have we done that? Okay, if that's true, cool. Have we done that? Okay, is that true? Cool. Have we done that? Okay, is that true? Okay, then run the function. So self.exploded, if not self.exploded. So we're checking that it hasn't exploded, and now that should just run the explosion function should just run once when the rocket hits the terrain. There we go. Notice that it's a little bit quieter and it's causing a little bit less damage now, which is perfect. That's what we want. Okay, so that's one aspect solved. Now another aspect another thing we might need to look at for this rocket is if I fire the rocket up there, that rocket is going to keep going forever. I know that it doesn't exist that we can't see it, but it could keep going forever. So we can actually remedy that. What we need to do is we need to give these rockets a bit of a range. So let's go to our rocket and edit our projectile script, and we're going to give it a range. Max range, and that's going to be a number. So the distance that our rocket can travel. We need to, and in order to work out the distance it has gone so far, we can actually use the position that is sent to us in init projectile, and then we can just check how far away from that position we are. And if we're further away than our max range, then explode the rocket, and that's the end of us. The default for this should be, let's change it to 5,000. Okay, so so the way we're going to do that, we're going to do self.start position. We're going to set up a variable to keep hold of that data. At the moment it's 0. And when we run our init projectile, we're going to get hold of that start position equals, and we're actually given ray start there. So let's put ray start in there. So that's the start position. And then we need to check every frame. So let's create our onTick function, which is a function that will be called automatically by Crayta. And this is called every single frame. And then in here, we're just going to say if, let's get how far we've traveled, distance traveled. Distance traveled is equal to our current position. So self get entity get position minus the start position, self.start position. It's that vector. So that will give us a vector, which is 3 numbers, an x, y, and z coordinate. Or in this case, it's actually going to give us the line between those 2 points. So the vector of x, y, and z will describe that line, and we want to know the magnitude of that line, the size of it. So we can actually get that with the function length, which gets the length of. So this is basically going to say get the line between where we are at the moment and where we started, and get the size of that line, and then store that in a distance traveled variable. And then we can just do if distance traveled is greater than self.properties.maxRange, then, and here we will run our explode function. Self explode. And one other thing we need to do here is we also need to check here if we have not exploded, if not self.exploded. We don't want to run any of this logic if we've already exploded. Let's put it in there. Okay. So now if I fire into the sky, when it hits that max range, it's now exploding. So it won't carry on forever. And in fact, you could use that to do some interesting things with your projectiles, whatever they may be. So let's look at, so that's our rocket launcher. And let's look at how we can now use this same stuff in different ways. So we've got a rocket launcher, but what if I want to make a ray gun? Well, I will need to duplicate this rocket launcher, and I'll call it ray gun. And I will duplicate this rocket, right click, got there in the end, ray gun ray. So our ray gun is going to be the actual weapon, and then the ray gun ray is the projectile that we're shooting out of that weapon. So let's edit our ray gun first. We need to change a couple of things about this. So it's not a rocket launcher anymore, it's a laser pistol now. Is it a laser pistol? Laser gun. And we need to change all of the item spec stuff. So this needs to be a ray gun here. The grip will be pistol grip. And let's change the graphic as well. There we go. Let's also, we can tweak the projectile exit velocity if we wanted to. So we could change the speed that our laser shoots out. But I'm not going to do that for now, but you might want to do that. So that's our ray gun. And let's set our ray gun to default in here so that we don't have to find one to pick one up. So now I'm holding a ray gun. Just wait for the textures. And my ray gun shoots rockets, which is great. But it doesn't need to shoot rockets. Let's make it so it shoots something resembling lasers. So we could use this laser beam here. Let's go to our ray gun ray. And let's change it so that there's a couple of ways we could do this. We could use this laser beam and add this to our ray gun ray as the visualization of what this projectile is. Or something I quite like to do is let's change the weapon rocket to, if you just change it to a trail, and I'm going to choose red. Am I going to choose red? No, I'm going to choose yellow. No, I'm going to choose red. If you just add a trail, then that can look like a laser. I'll show you what I mean. So wait for the textures and... one thing we haven't done here is our ray gun is shooting the rocket. So let's edit the ray gun template, scroll down in our entity editor to where it says projectile template and change that to ray gun ray. So we've got our ray gun and we're changing the projectile template to ray gun ray. And now, yeah, I don't know whether that effect. So that's how to do it using a trail effect, which might be one way to make a ray or a laser. But let's look at adding a laser beam instead. So over here, we can actually delete our effect. We don't need that. Let's add a laser here. Set it to 000 position. We might actually want to move it down slightly into our trigger. So now I've got a laser. I'm going to need to increase the size of that trigger, otherwise it's going to hit into objects. So I've changed that to laser. And if I fire it, I now have this laser coming out the end of the gun. I keep hitting the bridge, that's why that's doing that. There we go. So something I didn't do last time, but is here, is this set forward function. So make sure if your laser is going off in weird directions, then you can actually use this set forward and give it the ray direction in the init projectile function in the projectile script. That will then make sure that the laser lines up with the direction that it's traveling. If I take that out, you can see that when I shoot a laser, sometimes they can come out like sideways and all different directions. And that doesn't look like a laser beam because a laser beam goes straight. So make sure that you add this self get entity, get set forward ray direction to your init projectile script. And that won't affect the rocket either, because the rocket will need that as well, technically. This is another good thing to do. So we now have a ray gun and we have a rocket. And if I wanted to, I could go into the ray gun ray and I could change the explosion and the fire explosion. So the fire explosion could be a smaller explosion. Let's go small. The sound itself could be more like a laser, I would say. Yeah, and the ray gun itself needs a laser shooting sound. That's a good one. So you can totally customize the gun and the projectile a little bit more depth to really polish it up and to make it feel more like a laser. Another thing I would do here is I would go to the ray gun and I would make sure that, because at the moment it's got 15 shots per clip, I would say a laser gun or a ray gun is unlimited. Unlimited amount of bullets. And I would also say that the damage is way too much. So let's look at the ray gun ray, because it would really just affect quite a small area. Let's change that to be 150. And let's change the damage to more like 400. So it's starting to feel a little bit more like a laser now. Cool. So that's a ray gun. Now, how about a magic wand? So there's a reason I'm going to do a magic wand, and it's because it allows us to really amp up the effects and stuff like that. But there's not too much to it now. Now that we've done it a couple of times, you can probably guess what I'm going to do. So I'm going to just duplicate my ray gun, and I'm going to call it wand. And I'm going to duplicate ray gun ray, and I'm going to call that spell, because that's what comes out of a wand. And if I go to my wand now, I need to change this to be a wand here, and again down here, let's change this stuff to be wand. Let's change the grip to be knife grip. Let's use the icon, the correct icon for it, wand. Here we go. So we've got a wand, and let's open up the spell. So the spell, oh, the wand needs to cast a spell. Let's make sure we do that. So going back to the wand and just going down to projectile needs to be spell in here. Now let's go to the spell, and here is our laser beam, which we now don't want it to be a laser beam. So let's amp up some effects in here. So got some effects. I think there's some good lighting ones. There's a light sparkle glow, which might look quite cool. It's a bit above where I want it to be, so let's move it down. And let's edit that trigger so it's a bit smaller. Going back to this size, which is the same size as the rocket one. Let's also add a sound to this, so that when it travels through the air, you can hear it. So that's quite nice, but that won't loop. That sounds good. We're going to add a magical shimmer loop to it. And we're also going to add a light to it. And the light is going to be quite an intense low exponent and quite a small attenuation. And it's going to cast shadows. So it's going to be quite dramatic light. That's that. Now, the one thing that I would say about this is that when we have our wand and we've set the grip to type knife, we now need to consider that the fire animation, when a player shoots a gun, is no longer going to be run. It's going to try and run the melee animation. So in the gun script, we're going to need to rectify that. And we're going to actually, I think I might have already done it. Grip. No, has action. Here. So around line 139, you'll see it says parent play action fire. And a good way to rectify that for our wand is what we need to do is we need to check whether we can play the action fire. So we're doing if parent has action fire. And so that's saying if the character in its current grip mode can perform a fire action, then do that. Because if it's in any kind of grip mode, RPG, assault rifle, shotgun, whatever kind of grip mode it's in that can perform a fire action, do that. So it won't affect any of the other guns in our game. However, if we don't have that, we will be in the knife grip mode, or one of the other ones which doesn't have that. And so what we should do is play the melee action, which will give it like almost like a casting spell type action. And I've actually I've tripled the speed of it, because technically what you should be doing is running an event which happens when the melee action completes and it actually hits its target for the projectile to leave it. But we can actually circumnavigate that by just speeding up the animation, and it will still give the desired effect. But if you want to, you can go and look into that. So we're going to do, we're actually just adding this here. We're changing the parent play action by default to this. instead. And now, oh, I need to give the player the wand as well. If I go to the user defaults, change that to a wand. Now if I run the game, I should have a wand. There we go. He's a space wizard. And in this tunnel, if I cast a spell, notice how the light adds a really nice effect to that. It's still got the laser effect, the laser sounds, and still got the laser sort of feeling. So let's rectify that, go into our wand. The shot sound needs to be something more magical. Or it could be electric. It could be electric, it could be magical. Let's have a look at magic. Swish. That's good. That quick one is going to work nicely. And let's go to the spell, and when it hits something, that's when we're going to have the electric. Yeah, that sounds good. Instead of doing a fire explosion, we could do electric spark explode. That might look quite cool. So you can kind of tweak it and play around with this to create the projectile weapon of your dreams. And there you go. So there's like a wand, and it looks quite cool in this tunnel here. So there you have it. You have a couple of additions to that projectile weapon script to really like polish it up and make sure that it's as good as it can be. And then we've also looked at making a ray gun, and then we've also looked at making a magic wand. So there's some different projectile options for you there. And you can keep playing around with this stuff and making more and more projectile weapons and do whatever you like. Hopefully that was some good additions to the projectile stuff. I look forward to seeing what you make with all this projectile weapons tomfoolery, and I look forward to seeing you in Crayta.